Hey fellas, Nick here. I love watching movies, but I've always wanted to control one. Just being able to carve out your own piece of a story that you play would be the dream. And of course, when I say control, I mean pushing the X button sometimes.
Picture this. Gaming in the 1990s.
My blood oxygen hasn't been the same after that.
As someone who was barely even a piece of mRNA back in the 90s, when you look at things retrospectively, everyone fucking hated each other back then. Just look at the SNES and Sega Genesis. Those two were stuck in the biggest crotch measuring contest forever. You look into console wars of the present, it's mostly just people on social media defending their incredibly expensive picture box because one can download 12 more teraflops per gig of shit than the other. Then you look up 90s console wars.
That is not an argument, those are death threats.
In a time full of hardware advancing crazy fast, companies were getting competitive. Game studios were able to make the most realistic stuff yet, and one of the many ways they did it was with interactive movies.
Well, that's interactive.
Interactive movies were yet another thing that companies used to push their consoles. Like, wow, you can control the movie. This is why the Sega CD exists. Now, the history of interactive movies goes back depending on what you consider an interactive movie. Consider the term literally, and you'll get Kino Automat, a movie you watch where it sometimes stops to make viewers vote on how it continues. This was made back in 1967 and could only use a special theater of green and red buttons on every single chair to let the people vote.
What a win for democracy!
The movie is a satire about choice, with every option you pick always leading to the same ending.
Never mind!
But this is more of a movie than it is interactive, so let's discuss the first interactive movie, seen in arcades, basically a cult classic, and when people think interactive movie, it's always the obvious first pick. It's gotta be Wild Gunman.
I gotta change political parties.
No, we're not talking about Wild Gunman, the 1985 NES Zapper title. Instead, we're talking about Wild Gunman, the 1974 FMV game. Yes, this is a remake. The arcade game used big strips of film and a built-in light gun to make you really feel like a murderer. But those two were pioneers, not really big movie games like we had in the 90s. And with the 90s came a very important attachment for interactive movies, the Sega CD. It's a Sega Genesis, but it can play CDs. It has its own game slot, its own power adapter. The thing is 70% the size of an actual Genesis. So obviously, this has to be a standalone system.
What are you, fucking stupid? A console alone can't play CDs. Only a loser like the 3DO would do that.
Yeah, this is lame. The damn console is massive with all this setup, and can it really not function any other way? And even then, 2 power cables is dumb. It's just dumb. They should have just made one super cable you put into the Genesis that powers both of them.
I know the Sega CD is like 30 years old, but I still want to try and sell this to Sega.
But whatever, the Sega CD has the big selling point of full motion video.
Does that imply there's videos that aren't full motion?
Looking at this selection of about 140 games released in North America, not everything was an interactive movie. Part of the reason why the Sega CD sold like ass was because most games that weren't FMV were just upgraded versions of games that you already had on the Genesis. Listen, I love Flink, but I just want to buy it again. However, some games that weren't interactive movies took advantage of the FMV capabilities. Games like Popful Mail or The Adventures of Batman and Robin just added cutscenes and upgraded the game a little bit from their other versions. However, those two and Sonic CD are examples of animation. You can work with the console's limits and get something that doesn't look too compromised. Sure, the video is the size of a fucking strawberry, but the low resolution and colors can work well. But when you go into recorded real life video, this is when the Sega CD gets ugly. Like, come on, do you really want to be eating while playing the lawnmower, man?
This croissant's stale.
Yeah, this is where we get properly into interactive movies on the system. They were a big thing to do. Instead of making something actually using the console to be technically impressive, just slap some fucking video on screen. They don't care. And this was the root of the issue with the interactive movie craze. It was more movie than it was interactive. Night Trap, one of the biggest interactive movies of all time, so disgusting and graphic that it's part of why the ESRB exists, and the gameplay just has you trapping these dudes sometimes.
I'm such a gamer.
Double Switch, it's Night Trap again! Wanna follow the story? Too bad, because you have to stare at this one specific room because you have to get this guy at this moment. The Sega CD was trying to hold on to the market, but all I really had were these FMV games or enhanced Genesis games. Echo on Sega CD. You already had a Genesis, you can already buy Echo the Dolphin, why get it on Sega CD?
What can I say? I fucking love dolphins.
The Sega CD ran from 1992 to its discontinuation the first day of 1996. The FMV output just wouldn't stop happening. Digital Pictures and Sega were both huge suppliers of FMV games. The only difference is, Sega was actually trying to make good FMV games. Midnight Raiders, Fahrenheit, Surgical Strike, Wirehead, all these were made by Sega super late into the console, and I mean, they're pretty good. The video quality is better, the gameplay feels more fleshed out, and the Sega CD was still f***ing failing. These games were just getting bigger and bigger, and nobody cared because people saw these as lesser experiences. Just think for a second about what a game like Fahrenheit is being put in. Sounds simple enough, you're a firefighter, any casual gamer can play that. The problem is, no casual gamer is playing the damn Sega CD. Sega spent all their time before trying to be better than the SNES by targeting the edgier and the older crowd. But then, a few years later, Sega released a CD add-on and they're just trying to target casuals. But how are you gonna target casuals if you just told them all to fuck off?
You know what? I'm gonna use bug spray from now on. Wait, where'd all the mosquitoes go?
The Sega CD just felt overall confused. It was riding hard off of FMV games, and nobody was finding them that interesting. Games like Mad Dog McCree or Prize Fighter existed on the Sega CD, being an actual game that simply used FMV as visuals, but most people weren't thinking of those games. Instead, they were thinking of interactive movies as a gimmick, not actually as a real thing. Games like Time Gal, Road Avenger, and Dragon Slayer are what people thought of. You watch a pre-made story, instead of interacting with it, you press a button so you don't lose. So, the Sega CD failed, and Jelly Belly Bean Boozled didn't.
I need to stop saying that so often.
But no worries, because the 3DO was coming! A dedicated console for CDs and not some lame hybrid tumor, the 3DO must have fixed everything with interactive movies, right guys?
Are you sure you don't want to play Road Rash?
Yeah, if you try to look at the 3DO's output of interactive movies, even though the hardware was better, most didn't care. The 3DO was trying to do more impressive things, the 3D craze was hitting much harder now, and interactive movies had to do something interesting. Instead, all players got were generic interactive movies like Brain Dead 13, where you really can't do much.
I don't get it, why did the 3DO fail?
Also, it has Cowboy Casino.
Oh, well that says it all right there.
In North America, the 3DO had just over 160 games released for it. I've coughed more games than that, man. It was obvious that people didn't really care about these types of games, and developers were way more focused on making 3D games for this time period. These studios would need to take way more time to develop these games, and nobody was willing to take a chance. Unless you were Sega. In the end, a bunch of companies tried interactive movies. That's all that really happened. Nobody was sold on it because the games that needed to convince people on it weren't good. It felt like more of a way to show off FMV than a reason to make games. After 1995, the number of interactive movies was dead. Some games like Frankenstein from the Eyes of the Monster and Quantum Gate came to the Sega Saturn, but it's not a coincidence that the only console with interactive movies on it sold like fucking shit that generation.
And that was it for a while. Some companies tried it, most people didn't really like it, and games became less focused on FMV as a whole. But at the turn of the century, something happened that was monumental for gaming as a whole. The modern form of what an interactive movie is so blurry, but, you know, I'm glad it's that way. When you can't neatly stick everything into little categories, that just means developers are getting more unique with how they make certain games, and that they don't have to fit into these little by-the-book definitions that everyone's made for them. So, let's go through a variety of games I would consider interactive movies in the modern age.
First off, I'd be pissing on the face of interactive movies if I didn't mention Quantic Dream. They make some of the most popular interactive movies that the Xbox One can't play.
That is, of course, until Xbox buys Quantic Dream so they can monopolize more of the industry, because don't you love video games?
But while my previous examples were games that had a very set-in-stone, locked-in story, a game like Detroit Become Human has hundreds of branching paths. The damn demo for the game has 6 endings. That is insane! There's a reason why they've only made 5 games in their existence, the earliest being Fahrenheit.
No, I'm not talking about the interactive movie Fahrenheit. I'm talking about the interactive movie Fahrenheit. Get with the fucking program.
You see, this game was actually named Indigo Prophecy in North America, but for some reason Europeans got 2 interactive movies named Fahrenheit in the span of 10 years. And then 10 years later, a Fahrenheit remaster came out, so I cannot wait to see the trend continue with a Fahrenheit reboot in 2025. Now as for the game itself, I think the biggest issue with this early game is that the graphics are pretty lacking. To make something truly immersive, you need better graphics.
And that brings us to an overpriced grill.
Right around the time that everyone would rather cook a steak than buy a game on the PS3, Heavy Rain was announced. And not only did it look not bad, it looked good too. Now, I personally haven't played Heavy Rain or their other game, Beyond Two Souls, but I have done one playthrough of Detroit Become Human, and it's a pretty crazy game. Like, damn, that polygon does look like a fake human. I wasn't one of those people crying over the story, though. I can release my emotions in more healthy ways. If anything, you could call a lot of PlayStation exclusives interactive movies on their looks alone. My mom would sometimes just watch me play Uncharted because it looked realistic enough. Like, does that make it an interactive movie?
I don't know, but I do know Henry Stickmin is.
Now, this for sure is an interactive movie. It was released as smaller Flash games until the company Intersoft created the Henry Stickmin collection, remastering all the old ones and bundling in the big conclusion for our protagonist. You might also know Intersoft from making the game Dig to China and absolutely nothing else. But maybe you're looking for a more classic and shittier experience, one that's closer to the compressed and sad FMVs of the 90s, a true Sega CD movie experience.
What the hell's wrong with you?
Press X to not die. Okay, so this is more of a satire on interactive movies as a whole. I mean, the game opens with your friend telling you to press X to not die.
Ha ha ha, it's like the name of the game.
Then he gets stabbed and he says he would have survived, but he didn't press X. It's a fun game, mostly because it knows to not take itself seriously, but that's part of the fun. It's not that interactive, but the story's a little interesting and hey, you can laugh at it a little bit, okay? Now, what isn't funny is the remasters of old interactive movies. Night Trap 25th Anniversary Edition and Corpse Killer 25th Anniversary Edition. These are still the same mediocre games at heart, they just look better. They're still modern interactive movies because they release in a modern time, so congratulations, you count as a technicality. Are you proud of yourself? But then there's the ones where you're just not totally sure if they'd be interactive movies or not, like Every Life is Strange or Telltale game. These are stories that gradually come out in episodes. The nerve of them to sell me Minecraft Story Mode with only one episode on the disc because I didn't check a footnote. Or what about any visual novel ever? I mean, you're playing a story that you can usually interact with, so it's not like it's totally exempt. The Stanley Parable, you pretty much go on a set path, but then you can deviate from it and create other stories off of it. So there's multiple endings that you simply walk through, so... Or what about the movies that are interactive, not just the games? I remember Netflix started doing it and ported over Minecraft Story Mode. There were some apps like Snacks and Whatify that did this too.
I could go on, but I need to stop eventually. My doctor says that if I ramble too long for interactive movies, it could hurt my potassium levels. Overall, interactive movies are